The air inside the auction barn was heavy with the smell of hay, damp wood, and the faint metallic tang of nervous sweat. Voices echoed in restless murmurs, punctuated by the sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel and the impatient shuffle of boots on the dusty floor. Horses shifted in their pens, their hooves thudding against wooden planks, each one waiting for a fate decided not by their will but by the highest bidder. Amidst the sound and smell and tension, one pen drew the most attention, not with admiration but with disdain. Inside it stood a foal, all bone and wild eyes, ears flattened in defiance, ribs visible under a rough coat that had lost its shine. It was smaller than the others, trembling on legs that looked too frail to support its body, yet there was a raw fire in its gaze that unsettled the crowd. Men gathered in clusters, whispering sharp remarks, their laughter cutting through the air. "That one's cursed," one spat, shaking his head. "Look at the scars. Won't let anyone near it. Waste of good feed." Another chuckled, spitting tobacco onto the dirt. "Better off putting it down. No one wants trouble like that." Their words carried easily, bouncing off the rafters until they seemed to echo everywhere, feeding the foal's terror. It kicked against the gate, nostrils flaring, eyes rolling white as though it understood every insult hurled at it. At the back of the barn, half in shadow, Clara stood silently, her arms crossed against the chill and her own nerves. She wasn't supposed to be here. The auctions were a place for hardened ranchers, men with calloused hands and sharp tongues who measured worth in dollars and pounds of flesh. Clara was different, young, alone, and still learning to hold herself steady after her father's sudden passing. The ranch had felt emptier since then, every corner echoing with his absence, every stall reminding her of the lessons he used to give about patience, kindness, and respect for even the weakest creatures. It was his words, not her own ambition, that had brought her here tonight. The auctioneer's voice rose above the restless crowd, sharp and practiced. He gestured toward the pen, his tone clipped with irritation. "Next lot. One foal 6 months. Stubborn, skittish, and dangerous. We'll start at 50. His words held no warmth, no attempt at persuasion. He already knew the outcome. No one in their right mind wanted this animal. A silence stretched across the barn, heavier than the hay-scented air. Men shifted their boots, coughed into their hands, glanced away as though even looking at the foal was unlucky. The auctioneer tried again. 40, 30, 20. Still nothing. Only the nervous shuffle of the foal, the clatter of hooves against wood. The auctioneer sighed, his patience thinning. $10. Anyone? His voice fell into the void, swallowed by silence. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She could hear it in her ears, louder than the gavel, louder than the muttered laughter that had begun to rise around the room. Something in the foal's eyes had caught her, something she couldn't explain. Not defiance, not wildness alone, but a fierce will to endure, to fight even when the world seemed set against it. She recognized that look, because she had seen it in the mirror during sleepless nights when grief threatened to hollow her out completely. Her father's voice, so clear in memory, whispered at the back of her mind. Sometimes the most broken souls only need someone to believe in them. Clara drew a sharp breath and raised her hand before her courage could falter. Laughter burst out immediately. Heads turned. Someone muttered, "Fool girl." Another chuckled, "She'll regret that by morning." The auctioneer looked almost startled before shrugging and slamming the gavel down. "Sold. $10. Clara forced her legs to move forward, though they felt like stone. Every step toward the pen made her pulse quicken. The foal thrashed against the gate, ears pinned, teeth bared as though it would rather destroy itself than be touched. The handler gave Clara a doubtful glance. "You don't know what you're getting into," he muttered, fumbling with the latch. "This one's meaner than it looks." The gate creaked open, and in that moment the barn seemed to hold its breath. Clara stepped forward, slow and careful, her hand outstretched though her stomach knotted with fear. The foal lashed out, hooves slicing the air dangerously close to her arm. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by another round of mocking laughter. Someone shouted, "Told you so!" But Clara didn't retreat. She swallowed her fear, steadied her hand, and held her ground. Her eyes locked with the foal's, refusing to flinch. She saw the fury, yes, but behind it she glimpsed something else. Pain, confusion, the deep wound of betrayal. This was not hatred for her, but hatred born from fear. Clara's voice was low, steady despite the hammering in her chest. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." For a moment the foal froze, trembling violently, as if torn between fight and surrender. Then it jerked back, striking against the pen again, making the wood shudder. Clara didn't push further. Instead, she stepped back, giving it space, showing she wasn't a threat. The foal blinked, sides heaving, nostrils flaring. The handler shoved a worn lead rope into Clara's hand with a shake of his head. "Good luck, miss. You'll need it." He spat on the dirt and walked away. Clara looped the rope carefully, her palms sweating. She didn't tug, didn't force. She simply stood, waiting, her quiet presence contrasting with the loud jeers still drifting from the crowd. Slowly, hesitantly, the foal edged forward, ears flicking back and forth, eyes darting. With one final surge of energy, it bolted out of the pen, nearly tearing the rope from Clara's grip. She stumbled but held firm, letting it run in a tight circle before it realized there was nowhere to go. Breathless, Clara whispered again, soft and unyielding. "You're safe now." Gasps turned to murmurs, then to silence. For a fleeting second, the foal stood still, its wild gaze fixed on her. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it wasn't blind panic either. It was something in between, fragile and trembling. Clara straightened, her grip steady, her resolve even steadier. She could feel the weight of every eye in the barn, feel their judgment, their amusement. None of it mattered. This was not about them. It was about the fragile creature at her side and the promise she had made silently when she raised her hand. As she led the foal toward the barn's open doors, laughter still chased her, though softer now, tinged with something less certain. She ignored it all. The night air outside was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of wet grass and pine. The foal balked at the threshold, tugging against the rope, but Clara coaxed it gently forward. Step by step, they crossed into the darkness together. She glanced at the foal, its coat dull, its body trembling, its spirit battered but unbroken. Her chest ached with both fear and a strange, fragile hope. Under her breath, meant for no one else, she whispered, "You're coming home." Behind them, the auction barn hummed with noise once more, as if nothing unusual had happened. But for Clara, everything had changed. She tightened her grip on the rope, guiding the foal into the unknown, and though doubt gnawed at her edges, something inside her refused to let go. The journey was only beginning. The journey back to the ranch was slow and uneasy. The foal resisted every step, jerking at the rope, tossing its head wildly as if the air itself was an enemy. Clara kept her grip firm but gentle, speaking in a quiet stream of words meant more for herself than the trembling creature at her side. The cart rattled behind them, ready to carry the foal the rest of the way, but coaxing it toward the wooden ramp felt like asking the storm to obey the wind. At last, after endless patience and several failed attempts, the foal stumbled inside, its hooves clattering against the planks as though it had just been led into a cage. Clara climbed onto the driver's bench, fingers raw from rope burns, and flicked the reins. The wheels turned, creaking toward home. The ranch lay quiet when they arrived, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves and the soft calls of night birds. Clara's chest tightened as she led the foal down, guiding it toward the stable that had once been her father's pride. Dust lingered in the beams of lantern light, cobwebs stretched across corners, and empty stalls whispered of better times. The foal balked at the doorway, eyes wide, sides quivering as though invisible hands held it back. Clara stepped ahead, placing herself inside the dim stable, and waited. After a long hesitation, the foal edged forward, hoofs tapping uncertainly against the floor. She closed the stall behind it, securing the latch. The foal spun immediately, testing the wood, eyes frantic. Clara leaned against the door, breathing slowly, allowing her own exhaustion to settle. She could feel the weight of doubt pressing in, heavier than the walls. What had she done? This creature was wild, damaged, unpredictable. It wanted no part of her care. And yet, when she caught the gleam in its eyes, she remembered why she had lifted her hand at the auction. It was not pity. It was recognition. The first morning was a battle. The foal refused food, standing stiff and tense, muscles drawn tight as wire. Clara laid the hay gently in front of it, set down a bucket of water and stepped back. Hours passed before the hay was touched, the water left untouched altogether. Clara worked in the surrounding stalls, sweeping old straw, polishing rusted tools, pretending not to watch though her gaze strayed constantly toward the new arrival. When she finally left that night, she lingered at the door, whispering, "Tomorrow will be different." But tomorrow brought the same. The foal would not eat while she was near. Its eyes followed her every move with sharp suspicion. It kicked at the door when she came too close, ears pinned flat against its head, a sound of warning in its throat. Clara bore each rejection in silence. Her hands bruised, her heart bruised deeper, but she did not give up. She remembered her father kneeling once beside a frightened colt, telling her that patience was the only true language animals could understand. On the third night, Clara dragged a blanket into the stable and spread it across the straw. She sat just outside the stall, leaning against the wooden boards, humming softly to herself. Her voice trembled at first, but the familiar tune, an old song her father used to whistle, steadied her. The foal shifted restlessly, ears flicking at the sound. Clara closed her eyes, letting the music carry her through the ache in her back and the sting in her eyes. When she woke in the morning, stiff and cold, the hay was gone, the bucket drained. It was the first victory. Days stretched into weeks, each one measured in small steps forward and many steps back. The foal allowed her presence without immediate violence, though its body remained taut, ready to flee at the slightest movement. Clara moved slowly, never rushing, never reaching until the right moment. One evening, when the sun spilled gold across the fields and the barn glowed with warm light, the foal stepped closer than it ever had before. Clara held her breath, hand open and steady. After a trembling pause, the foal's muzzle brushed against her palm before jerking back in alarm. The touch lasted only a heartbeat, but it sent a rush of relief through Clara, tears stinging her eyes. She named the foal Ember, for the flicker of fire she saw in its eyes. Whispering the name aloud felt like christening not only the animal but also their fragile bond. Ember resisted it at first, tossing its head when she spoke, but the name settled in time, like a stone finding its place in a riverbed. Clara repeated it often, gently, until Ember began to turn its head when she called. It was around this time a neighbor stopped by, leaning against the fence as he watched Clara working. His face was lined, his voice tinged with pity and amusement. "That's the old Mitchell foal, isn't it?" he asked. Clara nodded, cautious. The man shook his head. "No wonder it's so wild. The man beat the sense out of it. Drove its dam off, near starved the poor thing. Surprised it's even alive." He spit into the dirt and adjusted his hat. "You'd be better off saving yourself the trouble. Some animals just ain't meant to be broken." The words struck Clara harder than she let on. That night, lying on the blanket near Ember's stall, she thought of the cruelty the foal had endured, and anger welled up inside her like a fire she could not contain. Ember was not broken, it was scarred. And scars, she knew, did not mean the end of life. They meant survival. She whispered softly into the dark, "They don't know you. But I do. And I won't let you go." The training began gently, in measured steps. Clara carried a brush into the stall, holding it low where Ember could see. The foal snorted, stepping back, but Clara did not advance. She simply waited, her breath steady, her eyes calm. Hours passed before Ember inched closer, curiosity tugging at its fear. The first time the brush touched its coat, Ember jerked away violently, slamming against the boards. Clara dropped the brush, hands raised, speaking softly, calming until the panic ebbed. The next day she tried again, and the next, until one quiet morning, Ember stood still under the brush, eyes half closed, the tension in its body melting as Clara stroked away the dust and grime of its past. The days grew brighter after that. Ember began to follow her steps around the paddock, ears pricking forward instead of back. Clara introduced a halter, slow and careful. Each attempt met with defiance until at last Ember allowed it. The leather looked foreign against its neck, but it did not fight as before. For Clara, the moment felt like a promise kept, proof that patience was not wasted. Yet just when hope seemed to settle, the bond was tested. One night, a storm rolled in, thunder cracking across the sky. Lightning split the dark, illuminating the paddock where Ember reared in terror, breaking through the fence in a frenzy of fear. Clara's heart seized as she sprinted into the rain, calling Ember's name into the roaring wind. Her voice cracked, her body soaked, but she did not stop. Somewhere in the dark, hooves pounded against wet earth, fading into the distance. Clara's lungs burned as she stumbled forward, whispering through clenched teeth, "I won't lose you. Not now." The rain poured harder, blurring the fields into shadows, but her determination held steady. Ember was out there, terrified and alone, and she would find him. The storm clawed across the night sky, each flash of lightning exposing the wild sweep of the fields and the empty stretch of pasture. Clara's boots sank into the mud as she ran, the rain plastering her hair to her face, her throat raw from shouting Ember's name. Panic pressed against her ribs, heavier than the storm itself. Ember was alone, frightened, and still more shadow than companion, and she knew too well how fear could break fragile progress in a heartbeat. The thought of him tangled in wire, or fleeing until exhaustion overtook him, drove her forward when her body begged her to stop. Her lantern had long since gone dark, drowned by the downpour. She relied on flashes of lightning to guide her, scanning the horizon for movement. At last, through the sheets of rain, she caught the faintest glimpse, an outline thrashing near the edge of the field. Clara's heart leapt and broke in the same beat. Ember had bolted straight into the barbed wire fencing, the sharp strands twisted around his slender legs, blood streaking down his trembling body. His eyes were wide and white, wild with terror, every muscle fighting the trap that only cut deeper with each desperate lunge. Clara slid to her knees in the mud, skidding close enough to feel the spray of rain from Ember's thrashing hooves. She raised her voice above the thunder, not in a shout but a calm, steady tone. "It's me. I'm here. I won't hurt you." Her hands shook as she reached for the wire, careful of the sharp barbs. Ember struck out, hooves slicing the air dangerously close, but she did not retreat. Pain stung her palms as the barbs dug into her skin, but she kept working, speaking low, threading her father's words through the chaos. "Easy now. Trust me, Ember. Please." For an agonizing moment, Ember froze, sides heaving, ears pinned. Then something shifted. Whether exhaustion or recognition, Clara could not tell, but the frantic fight dulled enough for her to slip the wire free. Each strand came loose with a hiss, leaving bloody lines across Ember's legs. Clara's own hands were raw and bleeding, but she hardly felt it. When the last coil fell away, Ember sagged, trembling. His head lowered as though the storm itself had finally beaten him down. Clara pressed her forehead to his damp neck, her breath shaking. "You're safe now," she whispered. The foal shuddered but did not move away. Instead, it leaned into her, fragile but willing, as though the storm had carved a fragile thread of trust stronger than all her quiet days of patience. In the silver light of the storm, Clara knew this was the moment their bond had truly begun. By the time they reached the stable, dawn's gray light was breaking through the clouds. Ember limped beside her, weak but steady, each step proof of his will. Clara guided him inside, her body aching, her hands blistered, but her heart alive with determination. She cleaned his wounds carefully, whispering to soothe him as she worked. Ember flinched, but he did not fight. When the bandages were tied and fresh straw spread beneath him, Clara sank onto her blanket, exhausted. Ember lowered his head, resting it against the stall door near where she lay. For the first time, Clara fell asleep not in worry but in fragile hope. Word of Ember's escape and rescue spread quickly among the neighbors. Some shook their heads, muttering that Clara was foolish, that risking her life for a doomed foal was madness. Others watched with a wary curiosity as Ember's wounds healed and his posture grew stronger. It was during one of these days, when Clara was leading Ember through gentle walking exercises, that a stranger appeared at the fence. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his boots polished and his hat set with precision. His name was Mr. Hayes, a wealthy rancher known for his prized horses and his sharp tongue. He studied Ember with narrowed eyes, lips curled into a smile that carried no warmth. "So this is the one you wasted your money on," he said, his voice smooth but edged. Clara tightened her grip on Ember's lead rope, wary. Hayes chuckled. $10 for a nightmare on legs. Generous of you, though I suppose charity has its uses. Clara ignored the sting of his words, but Hayes stepped closer, resting his hands on the fence rail. "I'll take him off your hands," he offered, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "No sense breaking your back over an animal that'll never amount to more than trouble. I'll even give you 15 for him. Think of it as a profit." The suggestion curled Clara's stomach. She shook her head firmly. "He's not for sale." Hayes's smile faltered, his gaze turning cold. "Suit yourself," he muttered, tipping his hat before walking away. But the weight of his stare lingered long after he was gone. Spurred by Hayes's words, Clara doubled her efforts. If she could prove Ember was more than his scars, she could silence every doubt, every sneer. Training became their shared language. Each morning began with groundwork, teaching Ember to walk calmly beside her, to trust the pressure of the rope, to follow without fear. At first he resisted, tugging and jerking away, but Clara's patience never wavered. Every step earned was a small victory. Weeks passed, and Ember's body began to change. His coat grew shinier under her care, his muscles stronger from steady work. Where once he had stood trembling, he now carried himself with a cautious confidence. Clara felt pride swell in her chest each time he responded to her voice, each time his eyes softened with trust instead of suspicion. One evening, while leading Ember through the paddock at sunset, Clara paused, watching the foal's graceful stride against the golden light. A thought struck her. What if Ember could prove himself publicly? There was a showcase event at the end of the season, a gathering where ranchers displayed their young stock. It was not a competition of speed or skill alone but of spirit, resilience, and presence. The idea burned in her mind, dangerous yet exhilarating. If Ember could stand before that crowd and show his transformation, it would silence Hayes, silence the doubts, and perhaps give both of them the chance at redemption. She began to prepare in secret, shaping their training toward balance, calmness, and trust under pressure. The work was demanding, testing both her patience and Ember's endurance. Some days he resisted, balking at unfamiliar challenges, but Clara adjusted, never pushing harder than he could bear. Their bond deepened with every session, each triumph a thread pulling them closer. But progress carried its cost. One afternoon, after a long day of training, Ember stumbled, collapsing onto the dirt, his sides heaving, sweat soaking his coat. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, guilt clawing at her chest. "I pushed too hard," she whispered, tears mixing with the dust on her face. For hours she stayed by his side, coaxing him to drink, praying he would rise. When he finally staggered to his feet, shaky but determined, Clara wrapped her arms around his neck. Relief coursed through her as his warm breath brushed against her cheek. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "We'll go slower. We'll do this together." The decision to enter the showcase was no longer about proving the world wrong. It was about honoring the fragile trust that had grown between them, about showing that scars did not define worth. Clara looked at Ember, standing tall despite the wounds of his past, and knew that their journey was only leading toward one inevitable test. The day of the showcase dawned clear, the sky painted with streaks of rose and gold. Clara stood at the stable door long before the sun rose, her hands trembling as she fastened the lead rope to Ember's halter. He stood tall beside her, his coat gleaming in the early light. His eyes alert yet calm in a way that seemed impossible compared to the terrified foal she had first led from the auction. His scars remained, faint ridges along his legs and flank, but they no longer marked him as ruined. They marked him as a survivor. Clara smoothed her palm down his neck, whispering, "We're ready." The words were not for him alone but for herself, a vow spoken aloud. The grounds of the event buzzed with noise and motion. Horses stamped and snorted in their pens, ranchers barked instructions, children darted between stalls with ribbons trailing behind them. Clara guided Ember carefully through the chaos, feeling his muscles tense beneath her touch. He hesitated, ears flicking back at every unfamiliar sound, but he did not bolt. Clara steadied him with her voice, her presence, each step forward a testament to the bond they had built. Whispers followed them like a shadow. Faces turned, some with curiosity, others with disbelief. Clara caught fragments of conversation as she passed. "Isn't that the Mitchell foal? The cursed one? She brought him here." The words pressed against her like stones, but she held her head high, keeping her focus on Ember. He was no longer the creature of mockery they remembered. He was hers and he was ready. When their names were called, Clara's breath caught. She led Ember into the arena, the ground crunching softly beneath their feet. The stands were filled with ranchers and townsfolk, their eyes sharp with judgment. At the far end, she spotted Hayes leaning against the railing, his expression cool and certain, as if he were already waiting for her to fail. Clara ignored him, pressing her palm lightly to Ember's neck. "Just us," she murmured. The announcer's voice echoed across the space, introducing them with little enthusiasm. A hush settled as all eyes fixed on the pair. Ember shifted nervously, his ears twitching, hooves scraping the dirt. Clara felt the tremor of his unease through the rope, the fragile line between calm and panic. For a heartbeat, fear coiled in her chest, whispering that Hayes had been right, that this was too much. Then she met Ember's gaze. The fire still burned there, steady and alive. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself. "We can do this," she said, more prayer than command. The routine began simply, walking the length of the arena, halting at her signal. Ember's steps were tentative at first, but Clara's steady voice coaxed him forward. The crowd shifted, unimpressed. Clara kept her focus, refusing to rush. She gave Ember space to breathe, to find rhythm. Step by step, his stride grew smoother, more assured. When she guided him into a trot, his movement carried a surprising grace, the kind of strength that silence could not dismiss. Murmurs rippled through the stands, voices softer now, uncertain. Clara's heart pounded as they approached the final sequence, a series of obstacles designed to test trust and composure. Poles to weave between, a narrow bridge to cross, and a small jump at the end. Ember balked at the first pole, ears back, eyes rolling. Clara paused, not pulling, not pushing, simply waiting. She whispered his name, her voice steady despite the roar of her pulse. After a tense silence, Ember took a step forward, then another, until he was weaving through with cautious grace. At the bridge, he stopped again, hooves refusing the wooden slats. Hayes's laugh carried across the arena, sharp and mocking. "Told you," he muttered loud enough for others to hear. The sting of it nearly broke Clara's focus, but she pressed closer to Ember, laying her hand against his neck. "You're not broken," she whispered. "You're brave." Her words seemed to settle in him. With a deep breath, Ember stepped onto the bridge, each hoof striking wood like the beat of a drum. When he reached the other side, Clara's chest filled with pride so fierce it nearly brought tears. Only the jump remained. It was small, but for Ember it was the greatest test. He snorted, pawing at the ground, his body tense. Clara could feel the crowd leaning forward, waiting for failure. Hayes's smirk widened. She inhaled, releasing every ounce of doubt. "Together," she said. Then she moved forward, guiding Ember into stride. For one breathless second he hesitated, then with a surge of strength, he leapt, clearing the bar with a grace that silenced the arena. The crowd erupted, cheers spilling into the air where only whispers had been before. Clara's legs nearly buckled, her chest burning with emotion. She pressed her forehead to Ember's, whispering through her tears, "You did it. We did it." Judges conferred at the edge of the ring, their voices hushed. When they announced Ember as the day's standout, not for flawless performance but for spirit and transformation, the applause swelled again. Clara stood in the center of the arena, her hands shaking as she accepted the ribbon, but the true victory stood beside her. His eyes bright, his posture proud. Hayes approached after the crowd began to disperse, his face taut with restrained irritation. "Luck won't carry you far," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. Clara met his gaze, unflinching. "It wasn't luck," she replied. Her hand rested on Ember's neck, steady and sure. "It was trust." Hayes sneered but turned away, his shadow shrinking into the departing crowd. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the fields in amber light, Clara led Ember from the grounds. The ribbon fluttered in her hand, but it was not the cloth that filled her with pride. It was the warmth of Ember at her side, the unspoken bond forged in patience, in storms, in scars. Back at the ranch, she opened the stable door and let him roam freely in the paddock. He trotted out, head high, tail flicking in the golden dusk. Clara leaned against the fence, watching him, her chest tight with joy. She could almost hear her father's voice, quiet and sure, echoing in the wind. Sometimes the most broken souls only need someone who refuses to give up. Clara smiled, brushing the dirt from her hands, the ache of the past months settling into something softer, something whole. Ember paused in the field, turning his head toward her, his ears pricking at the sound of her voice when she whispered his name. For a moment, it felt as though the world itself held still, honoring the fragile, fierce bond between them. The journey was not over. There would be more storms, more trials, more doubts. But as the light faded and Ember grazed peacefully in the field, Clara knew the hardest part was behind them. They had found each other in the ruins of loss and fear, and together, they had created something unbreakable. She drew a deep breath, the evening air cool and sweet. "We're home," she whispered. Her words carried across the field, soft but certain, and Ember lifted his head as though he understood. And in that quiet golden hour, Clara realized she had not only saved the foal no one wanted, she had saved herself.